You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there. I'm Kelly Barner, and today is Friday, April 14th, 2023.
6.
Today's tip of the week is a bit of advice for your time on LinkedIn. A lot of us have creator mode turned on. And one of the things that means is that other people are encouraged to follow rather than connect. Now, for me personally, I'd rather get a connection request, but with a little bit of information. Take a minute to tell me why you want to connect. Did you hear a podcast, read an article, attend an event that I was at? I love to find out where people found me and know why they decided to reach out. We're all on LinkedIn to connect, and I know everyone has a different comfort level with meeting strangers. So taking the time to explain what you have in mind and maybe offer a little something about yourself can make all the difference in a fruitful future connection.
5.
In this week's podcast, Brian Peters, Senior Director of Global Procurement Services and Delivery at Gilead Sciences, joins Philip Eidson to share an interesting theory that he holds. Brian believes that if his team builds better upstream business relationships, they will be able to measure the benefits in terms of higher savings, improved business outcomes, increased stakeholder satisfaction, shorter cycle times, and improved supplier experience. Basically, Brian is talking about Moneyball for procurement. Let's listen to a short excerpt from the interview.
I'll share something that I've asked my team to do, and I believe it's going to work. I don't know it's going to work. Ask me a year from now. But we're starting to capture some data at time of initiation of sourcing request. An example of this, I'm calling it engagement ratio. Are we engaged upstream or downstream as the catalyst for a sourcing event? And my thesis here is that if we're engaged upstream, or say early, time of budget, time of business plan, versus late, for example, legal received the contract request before they came to procurement, I think that the savings will be higher. I think that the business satisfaction with the outcome will be higher. I think that the business experienced end-to-end elapsed time will be shorter. I think that these 5 functions that we talked about will be better equipped to coordinate the end-to-end process. The supplier experience, I think, will be better. I think that this will yield massively differentiated outcome metrics, early versus late, right? Call this an engagement ratio. It's just one that I'm starting to capture some data now, and I want to prove this out. I have this sort of dream of a paper that articulates some of these metrics and stand behind, I think, what the procurement practice knows, and we use all these buzzworthy phrases of seat at the table and upstream engagement. I think this will translate into quantifiable outcomes.
Brian's approach here seems pretty bold, but I would love it if it worked. I'm pulling for him and his team, that's for sure. Can you imagine procurement being able to make the case with numbers that spending time partnering with the business leads directly to improved quantitative outcomes? That is something we all want to find out about for sure. Make some time to listen to the whole episode, capturing the ROI of upstream relationships on Art of Procurement, wherever you listen to podcasts, or using the direct link in today's show notes.
4.
Art of Procurement published a new white paper this week. Written in collaboration with the team at Consys Global, this paper asks whether procurement digitization is the need of the hour. Years of supply chain disruptions have highlighted the need for procurement to go beyond supply risk mitigation strategies and embrace full end-to-end process and data visibility. Being able to answer the business's questions requires robust data processes, including data capture, analysis, and predictive capabilities whenever possible. Download the paper linked in today's show notes to read about how perspectives on procurement digitization have changed in the last couple of years. Why an investment in digital procurement is actually an investment in the company itself, and what additional opportunities may reveal themselves as the change journey continues.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
In this week's episode of Dial P for Procurement, I looked at the sad and very sudden downfall of Silicon Valley Bank. There are two different types of aversion at play in this situation. One is risk aversion, and the other is loss aversion. Interestingly, those two theories don't always motivate us in the same direction. I explain all of this in more detail in the podcast, but Silicon Valley Bank actually had a pretty reasonable strategy for investing the huge deposits they received in 2020 and 2021. They put those funds into treasury bonds with the US government. Not exactly a high-risk investing approach. The problem is, when interest rates rose, the value of all those bonds fell. Pretty soon, there was a $17 billion gap between what SVB had paid and what the bonds were actually worth. At that point, anything their leadership team tried to do was going to lead to almost certain and immediate loss. And since humans are apparently hardwired not to select loss in most cases, they actually ended up engaging in even riskier behavior just to prevent immediate loss. Procurement has talked about risk management and risk aversion over the last few years, but starting to look at our choices through the lens of potential loss versus risk is really interesting and illuminating. Check out this week's episode of Dial P linked in today's Procurement 6 show notes, Loss Aversion Theory and the Collapse of SVB, and then subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform.
2.
In this week's episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast, I welcomed Christian Franz Hansen from the Business Partnering Institute. He helps his clients, most of whom are in finance, improve the overall strength of their business relationships. I think you'll be surprised at how many things procurement and finance have in common. One of the things he and I discussed is the challenge created by not having enough good partnership examples to emulate. We know what we are not supposed to do, but what does a good cross-functional partnership look like in real life? What does it feel like to be a part of one? And most importantly of all, what kind of results can it generate? I'll share a link to this episode in the show notes. And remember, we're always on the lookout for new sourcing heroes. If you are interested in joining me for an episode of the show, drop me an email at kelly@artofprocurement.com or send me a message or a connection request on LinkedIn.
1.
We have a couple of upcoming events that I know you're going to want to join us for. On April 19th, Colin Glazier from Zip will join Phil and I to talk about why 100% spend oversight is far better than 100% spend under management. This is one of the 6 key principles on the Art of Procurement mission to 10x the impact of procurement. And then, on April 25th, Gordon Donovan and Matthew Montgomery from SAP will join us, also live, to discuss how C-suite executives view procurement's role in managing risk. and why skills shortages may be part of the reason why procurement doesn't get more credit for their risk mitigation contributions. You can register for either of these events by visiting artofprocurement.com/calendar.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.